What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the next episode of my deep dive series, where we are taking an in-depth look, breaking down each NFL team throughout the course of the summer, all leading up to my number one ranked team. Today, we reveal the 27th ranked Chicago Bears, and don't go anywhere, because we are joined by the amazing EJ Snyder of the Bootleg Football Podcast, a lifelong Bears fan as well, at the end of the show. Really looking forward to sharing that interview with you guys. And I've been waiting for this deep dive too, because this is a really interesting Bears team, a team that has a lot of hype and expectations with all of the highlight reel plays that Justin Fields showed us last year with his upside. And I think the expectations from the majority of Bears fans out there are that this team can compete for the NFC North. So this video is going to be really fun to talk about all of the pivot points on this team, Justin Fields included, and what's going to have to go right for this team to compete for the division, which I do think is going to be possible for the Bears. But before we do get started, a ton goes into this series, from the graphics, the recording, the editing, the guest interviews. This series is all I have time for this channel this summer, so it's really important to me that these videos do well. And if you could please take a second to hit that like button. I know it sounds silly, but it really does help. It's a free and easy way to support my channel, tells YouTube you enjoy the content, and pushes it out to other NFL fans just like you. I really do appreciate it. And make sure you subscribe. Join me on this mission for 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and make sure you don't miss any of these deep dives as we go. But without further ado, let's get into it. And as always, we are going to start by taking a look at this team's key departures and additions. And, you know, going back to what we said about this team last year, this 2023 offseason was always going to be a big year for this Bears regime, who last year was really cleaning up cap space, getting rid of expiring veterans and all that. And now with this offseason, they had the draft capital and the cap space to make some moves. And it was a really good offseason for this Bears team, and obviously an integral part of why there is hype and expectations for this squad. So when you look at their departures, there's really not a whole lot to say. A good running back, sure, in David Montgomery, but as we'll see in a second, they did some things to supplement that, along with the offensive line losses. Sam Mustipher, who was always kind of a Band-Aid starter anyway, but did eat up 1,020 snaps for them last year. And then Riley Reiff as well at tackle, who actually still had some in the tank last year. It is worth noting that, but they're very much prepared at that right tackle spot, of course, taking Darnell Wright in the first round. So as far as like big highlight departures, that's really it. And then you have a bunch of placeholder Band-Aid players that did eat up a lot of snaps last year. But as you look at that list, I would argue, other than probably DeAndre Houston Carson, you're going to pretty easily upgrade at all those positions, and it's really just a list at that point. But when you look at their additions, this team that went 3-14 last year loaded up on both sides of the ball, and that, of course, starts with DJ Moore, their biggest acquisition of the offseason. Someone I'm excited to talk about. Reminds me a lot of the Eagles, who were looking for that big leap from Jalen Hurts from year 2 to year 3. They go and basically spend a first-round pick on A.J. Brown. Well, DJ Moore was basically a first-round pick that was swapped for, alternative to, getting a future first round pick from Carolina. Instead, they get DJ Moore in that trade. Very reminiscent of that. Cannot speak highly enough of getting him involved in that trade down. But beyond that, a couple of running backs to replace David Montgomery, both in the power variety with Deontay Foreman, Roschon Johnson. They bring in Robert Tonyan, who's going to follow Luke Getsy basically a year later over from Green Bay. We mentioned Darnell Wright at the top of the draft for them, and a big free agent acquisition in Nate Davis, who was one of the top guards on the market. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they have a haul. I honestly thought they would spend even more money on the defense, and there's going to be some areas left for concern. But DeMarcus Walker, their big signing on the D-line, Then on the interior D-line, they add Gervin Dexter and Zach Pickens on day 2 of the draft, spending the majority of their money here at linebacker, actually, in Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. And then one of my favorite picks of the entire draft, Tyreek Stevenson at cornerback in the 2nd round. So those are your big additions, and then some, 10 other notable additions as well. Tyler Scott, a receiver in the 4th round, PJ Walker as a backup, among a significant list here of guys that we are sure to talk about throughout this video as we get towards the roster portion of the video. But first, I want to look at this team's coaching staff and what sorts of schemes they're going to be running this year, as well as how this staff ranks stacked up against the rest of the league. So Matt Eberflus, to start things off as the head coach and overall defensive coordinator here, with Alan Williams, of course, being his right-hand man. I think I jumped the gun a little bit last year. I want to say we had Eberflus ranked in the mid-teens last year as a rookie head coach. And to be fair, it was a weird year with 14 teams had head coach turnover, so the rankings were a little bit weird last year. But, he still just has a lot to prove. This team did end up with the number 1 overall pick. And while he had an atrocious roster to work with his defense, this was one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So I am optimistic that Matt Eberflus was still a good hire. I thought he was more than qualified and worthy of being a head coach. But just, it is what it is. He hasn't proven anything yet. He's got a career record of 3-14 as a head coach. But I think as you look at who he is as a defensive mind, what they accomplished in Indianapolis, really, outside of bringing in DeForest Buckner, evolving their own players and drafting and developing there, whether that was Grover Stewart or Shaq Leonard, on top of a lot of just different key starters for those Colts defenses that ultimately turned into a good unit despite superstar talent. And Matt Eberflus is really known for elevating that group and developing that group. And that's really what you're hoping to see here in Chicago. And I still have a ton of faith in him as a defensive mind with Alan Williams. They're going to rank in that tier 2 of great defensive coaching. I know the proof is in the pudding and the results haven't shown yet, but this truly was a horrific defensive roster last year. And that's when you talk about this year being so important for him to start to show some more of those incremental gains, just as things played out with him in Indianapolis. I am a fan of his scheme as well. It's going to be a 4-man front, which feels like more and more of a dying breed these days. I think he inspires physical play up front, but he really varies his calls. And to me, that is like the easiest number 1 sign of a defensive coordinator being good at their job and actually doing their job. He's not going to just say, well, I'm going to run what I run. A big part of why he was so good at developing players in Indianapolis is he's going to cater his play call to his players, what they're good at, and also adapting to what the offense is trying to do to attack what he's calling. And in Chicago last year, we saw them run every coverage in the book. Man coverage was a little bit harder for them because they didn't necessarily have the bodies on the back end to do it. But I think we see more of that this year. We saw every zone call. We saw him blitz. We saw them run stunts. We see them occasionally try to win with 4, but he realized that's not going to happen. So he did start blitzing and doing what he could to manufacture some semblance of a pass rush last year with an XFL roster on the defensive line. So again, I'm a believer in Matt Eberflus. Can't rank him too high as an overall head coach because that's just something that he's going to have an opportunity to prove out in time. But I'm very optimistic that the defense is in good hands as far as the staff is concerned. Offensively, I'm also optimistic, and it's a similar conversation where you have a guy in year 2, Luke Getsy, who came over from Green Bay and all of the Kyle Shanahan influences with the wide zone offense, but likewise really changed his scheme as the year went on to adapt to his players, and specifically adapting to Justin Fields. And when you think about these Shanahan-style offenses, 12 personnel, under center, not a lot of opportunities for read option and QB power and, some of the stuff we see with like Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts and even like Lamar Jackson. Well, Luke Getsy said, well, we're still going to do a lot of wide zone. We're still going to do play action boots. And Justin Fields ran, it feels like on the top of my head, like as many play action boots as anybody out there. But they also ran a lot of QB run stuff, which is not something that's been found really in the Luke Getsy playbook going back to Green Bay and his even first couple weeks in Chicago. So I do think the adaptive nature of his playbook is encouraging. I think he's a smart young mind, but still very much unproven. And when you do expand the playbook like that, it is difficult to know when and where to call what. So finding that balance, really evolving this playbook with Justin Fields, something that you hope can grow in time. And ultimately, Luke Getsy has an opportunity here to emerge as one of the top offensive coordinator, true offensive coordinators in the league, which means eventually he's going to get a head coaching job if that happens. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's 12 offensive coordinators plus that are great head coaches as well. Luke Getsy could emerge as one of those premium offensive coordinators, which is some good for the Bears, but some bad, because he's probably going to get hired somewhere if things go well here. But they kind of knew that was going to be an eventual problem potentially when they hired a defensive head coach. I will say it wasn't always pretty. I felt like a lot of the times you had pullers running into each other and the run schemes weren't always pretty. Again, a lot of that was because the installs were happening as the year went on. It was a lot of new stuff for Luke Getsy. And I think a lot of the passing concepts as well. I know people want to point to the talent of these wide receivers, but I really did feel like they were having guys run into the same areas and not always presenting the cleanest picture as far as leveling zone defenses and attacking weak spots through the passing concepts themselves. So I'm not trying to dunk on Luke Getsy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think he has a good bit to prove, and he's going to rank in a tier 4 of just fine offensive minds for now until proven otherwise. But I think this is a staff that was hired with good reason and has shown plenty of signs that this can be the group that takes them to that next level as a team and compete for this division. Now, before we get into the roster, I got to tell you guys, Underdog Fantasy just continues to up their game as the best place to play fantasy football. You've probably heard about their season-long best ball competitions, which are amazing, their daily pick'em contests, but now they have season-long pick'em for the NFL, so you can go in and put your football knowledge to the test. You can select higher or lower on individual player stats. So if you think Justin Fields has a huge year, or you think Jordan Love's going to stink it up this year, you can go in and pick higher or lower on their season totals, string together lineups, and get up to 20 times your money back when you win. This is, I think, my favorite new way to play at Underdog Fantasy, and that's saying a lot because I already swear by their pick'em contests. I've been going to Twins games and making lineups every single time, and their best ball is fantastic, where you can go in and draft your team right now. You guys are going to love Underdog Fantasy if you're not playing there already. And now you can support my channel on top of that when you sign up with promo code TFG, and they'll match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's $100 of free play at Underdog Fantasy using promo code TFG. But now it's time for the good stuff, as we are going to start taking a look at this roster, and of course starting with the passing game and Justin Fields, where this is, of course, the overwhelming source of optimism for Bears fans this year. Like, if you believe the Bears can win this division this year, it's because you believe that with a better surrounding cast and another year of development, that Justin Fields can take that leap forward into year 3 towards being one of those special quarterbacks, whether you want to call that a great quarterback, a tier 2 or a tier 3 guy, whatever it is. We're talking about a quarterback that can take over football games and be the reason that his team is a playoff contender. Now, I do want to take a step back and stress that when it comes to this series and how I put together these rankings, this does get a bit tricky with a few of these quarterback grades, because we do have a separate quarterback run multiplier grade that actually carries a lot of weight towards the overall run game. So when you see this 24th overall ranking for Justin Fields among NFL quarterbacks, it might sound a bit low at first, but I do want you to consider the context that this number is used specifically to quantify what this passing game will look like this year. And for most passers, it isn't a huge difference, but for some of these guys like Fields, Lamar, and Hurts, where their legs is such a big part of the picture, it is something that I want you to keep in mind. Like, if we were putting together one of those quarterback tiers videos, and certainly I'm getting close to due to make one of those, Fields would probably come in a little bit higher than 24th when you're factoring in the entire picture all in one as far as how that quarterback ranks and what he brings to his team. But right now we're isolating the passing game. And to be honest here, 24th is like generous and optimistic based off of what Justin Fields showed us as a passer last year. And I'm not trying to take away from what his legs bring to the table here. In fact, that QB run multiplier does do a lot of heavy lifting. Many expected the Bears to be revealed already in this series and ranked lower than 27th as the team that just had the number 1 overall pick. But to fast forward a little bit, he's elite in the run game. Second behind only Lamar Jackson as far as what he brings with his feet. And surely we'll revisit this when we get towards that portion of this video, but exclusively looking at what Justin Fields has shown us as a passer, there's no way around it. He's got a long way to go. I'll show some film here to show you some of these points, but the stats back it up as well. Among the 36 quarterbacks last year that took at least 200 dropbacks, Justin Fields was dead last among those 36 quarterbacks in passing yards per dropback. He had by far the longest time to throw, which definitely shows on film where he's passing up open reads and not giving his receivers a chance and electing to play hero ball. 34th out of 36th in highest turnover-worthy play percentage, putting the ball in harm's way. 29th in adjusted completion percentage, factoring in drops and things outside of his control. 33rd in the percentage of pressures that he saw that resulted in sacks. And among all quarterbacks who played at least 15 games, he was 876 yards behind the next guy up. That was Davis Mills. And the next up from that was Russell Wilson, 1,298 yards ahead of Justin Fields, which, to add a little perspective there, that's the difference in the, that's more than the difference than the 1,193 rushing yards that Justin Fields had. And that's not including the rushing yards that came from designed runs. Now, of course, it's easy to look at a young Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, see similar struggles in the passing game, because let's face it, these are legit struggles in the passing game, but be optimistic that now with, of course, a much needed, much improved surrounding cast, that he can take similar jumps. But just because these other QBs have done it recently doesn't mean it's a guarantee that Fields also takes those steps. And when you turn on the film, of course, you'll see those highlight reel throws, but there are also countless examples of him with protection and open receivers, by the way, where he's not playing in rhythm, not throwing with anticipation, holding on to the ball too long. We showed you he was by far the longest in time to throw in the NFL last year. So he's playing hero ball. He's making things harder on himself and the offense. So based on a lot of this and based on the stats that I just showed you, ranking Fields 24th in the NFL is, one, baking in some projected growth as a passer, but it is also considering like how much his scrambling ability really does impact games. It helps him get out of trouble and also create these sensational explosive plays that we're all looking for. So like that's baked in here, but that's how you get to 24th. He really is a special player, but at some point he's gonna have to develop as a passer. And honestly, this sort of needs to be the year that this happens, or this team's not gonna be any good. Let's face it, this team's going to have a top draft pick with a really good quarterback class coming in, and they're probably going to be considering moving on from Justin Fields if this type of low-level passing production doesn't improve. And this is probably going to come off as a pessimistic outlook on Justin Fields. Ultimately, that's not necessarily what I have as my outlook on Justin Fields. I already said, like, some of ranking him 24th is assuming some general development there. But, like, this is honestly maybe the most hyped up player for the entire 2023 NFL season. You factor in the market that he plays for, the fantasy stats last year, how insane his highlight reel is, the college that he played for. We know what the upside and potential is with Justin Fields. What I'm trying to do is my job to point out, like, okay, that's amazing. And I believe in the potential of Justin Fields. There's a reason I gave them an A+ for moving up to get him on draft night. But at some point, somebody needs to come out here and point out, like, okay, but he sucked as a passer last year. Those Jalen Hurts level leaps, the Josh Allen leaps, they need to come this year. And that's a major question on if that's going to happen just because they improved the surrounding cast. There is reason to be excited here, but there is a lower floor than people realize based on what he showed as a passer last year as well. Anyway, the highs are undeniable. And Fields also seems to have that same leadership and drive to be one of the greats that, you know, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, they all ultimately had that helped them take that big leap in whatever year it happened for them, to the point that those three guys are all top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL now. And that's in the realm of possibility for Justin Fields this year. And man, it's going to be electric and exciting to see him play this year and to find out if that can happen. But do I think there needs to be a little bit of pump the brakes with the Justin Fields hype? Yeah, probably a little bit. You saw those numbers. It ain't great, Bob. Now, you do have PJ Walker, who's a fun backup to bring in here, who has mobility as well, so you don't have to change up the playbook if anything happens to Justin Fields, God forbidding. But you get an adult in the room and a real backup, but your season's done if anything happens to Justin Fields. Like we said, he is the prime source of optimism here. And Nathan Peterman, look, anytime I get a chance to defend Nathan Peterman, I'm going to take it. He might be one of the more underrated players in the NFL just based on the fact that he's a total meme. He beats out Tyrod Taylor in his rookie year, throws like 5 picks and 1/2 against the Chargers, and ever since then, people act like he's the worst player in the NFL. You know, he wouldn't still be around with backup quarterback jobs. He'd be playing in the XFL if he was as bad as everybody acts like he is. But there's no excitement for Nathan Peterman, but I just want to shout him out. He's still sticking around here. They also pick up Tyson Bagent, who got some combine hype. I didn't actually get to his film, so I'm not going to speak too much on him, but I don't know too many people truly in his camp. But obviously, it's going to be all eyes on Justin Fields and the types of leaps that he can take this year. And obviously, if the best case scenario happens, if he has that Jalen Hurts-esque leap, you're looking at a team that can compete for this division and get immense levels of optimism for the future of this team when it comes to trying to win a Super Bowl here. And of course, that goes hand in hand with what they've done for this group of weapons that needed work from the moment they took Justin Fields. And as I said earlier, getting DJ Moore is so reminiscent of what the Eagles did for Jalen Hurts, bringing in A.J. Brown. Similarly, use draft capital essentially to make it happen, and you're getting a guy in DJ Moore like A.J. Brown who isn't just going to help a guy like Hurts or Justin Fields take that next step for them, but as they grow together, that quarterback can help someone like DJ Moore take that next step to being a true alpha wide receiver. And when I say that, there's a difference between being a true number one, maybe a DK Metcalf or Amon-Ra St. Brown, where you're happy if they're your best wide receiver, but there's certain number ones that carry specific skill sets that need the right complementary players around them. Amon-Ra St. Brown needs his deep threat, why they took Jamison Williams. DK Metcalf needs route runners and short to intermediate game separators. DJ Moore can be that true alpha, a guy that wins to all three levels, that can be asked to run any route against any coverage, against any defensive back, and you can expect them to get open, come down with tough catches, and be a threat after the catch to be an alpha wide receiver in the NFL is rare territory, but I think DJ Moore has the traits to get there if the quarterback play can allow that from him, which just hasn't been the case in Carolina. And they weren't getting a player like that in this year's draft class, right? So to get him through this draft was a masterclass in that trade down from Ryan Poles. And the beauty of having a guy like this is it's your classic case of, well, your number one becomes your number two, and your number two becomes your number three. And that's a much more healthy slot for these next two wide receivers. Darnell Mooney can now be this team's number two as opposed to their number one. He's not going to face the, Sauce Gardners and Jalen Ramseys of the world now. He's going to be that flanker on the backside. He can run deep. He can run deep digs and really thrive in that role. To me, Darnell Mooney has always reminded me something like a Brandon Cooks, where his biggest strength is as a deep threat. He can separate short to intermediate, but Cooks has never been a number one, and I don't expect Darnell Mooney ever to be. But in a contract year where you're hoping things can grow this year, Mooney could be an explosive problem for defenses to handle. And I think for similar reasons, this is going to help a guy like Chase Claypool. Now, it was a disaster when this team traded what ended up being essentially a first-round pick to get Chase Claypool, because with the Dolphins pick getting forfeited, it was the 32nd overall pick that ultimately went to Pittsburgh for Chase Claypool. And would they take that trade back if they knew that was going to happen? I think most certainly. But it did cost this team a lot to get Chase Claypool for a reason. You can think back to his rookie season where, Fox is putting up Calvin Johnson comp, screen graphics for Chase Claypool because of the size and the production early in his career when Big Ben was still letting it fly a little bit. Now, he's not Calvin Johnson. Nobody's Calvin Johnson. That was always ridiculous. But there is talent there for sure. You're talking about a 6'4" receiver who's north of 230 pounds, who's shown incredible catches on tape. He's shown run after catch ability, and he's shown vertical separating ability. And now that he's pushed into the number 3 spot in a situation now where he can get familiar with Fields in the playbook instead of getting thrown into the disaster that was the Bears offense midseason last year. And you look at these systems with Luke Getsy and the Shanahan-style tree, Chase Claypool can be that Allen Lazard role, that Nick Westbrook-Akine role, if you will, that big-bodied slot wide receiver where he's going to be a matchup problem on safeties and linebackers and can just run in straight lines on crossing routes, be a bruiser after the catch, be an impactful run blocker. I think bringing in DJ Moore allows you to get Chase Claypool in a scheme fit that's best for him. Contract year for both him and Darnell Mooney. And as long as Fields is comfortable here and playing in structure and they're comfortable as a play calling unit, this really could be a group that works in unity. And you could see gains from DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Chase Claypool all within the roles that they're supposed to play, to the point that we view this in a similar breath to maybe like a tick down from like the Bengals, where they have that dynamic trio, right? But Fields did have those struggles as a passer last year. Chase Claypool was horrible for the Bears last year. Darnell Mooney did fall off a cliff last year. Like, they got to go out and execute it, right? The potential is all there for this group, but damn, it makes sense, and I like what they've done to give Justin Fields that best chance to develop. It really doesn't stop there either with the wide receivers. Equanimeous St. Brown, who was a starter for this team last year, now gets to be really at his rightful home as a wide receiver 4. He's a good blocker. He's a big-bodied guy. He's not a horrible athlete and separator. It just hasn't all come together for him. He's a little bit stiff and not the most natural football player. But as a 4, you'll definitely live with that. And then you have Tyler Scott, who they draft in the 4th round. I liked Tyler Scott. I certainly was lower on him than when where a lot of this draft hype went. But in the 4th round, where he ultimately went, I liked him there. I just thought 2nd round, even 3rd round was rich for him. But he's an athlete, a really fluid athlete as well, but speed is there. He can track the deep ball. I really don't think we see much from Tyler Scott in his rookie year. And I think in a dream situation, let's just be real, I think in a best case scenario, you never have to play Tyler Scott because you want Mooney and Claypool to play well in those roles we described and earn contract extensions themselves. But if Mooney does struggle this year, or maybe Claypool struggles, different receiver, but that's when you can look a year out for a young Tyler Scott and say, all right, he can maybe compete for a starting job next year. But when it comes to diversifying his route tree, learning how to beat press, winning contested balls, there's just a long way to go for him. But the potential is certainly there. And then you also have Velus Jones on the roster. They spent a third-round pick on him last year. He was 25 years old coming into the league. It was a very surprising pick when it happened because he wasn't productive at Tennessee, really, and his age. And he struggled in his rookie year based on their moves, bringing St. Brown back, drafting Tyler Scott, obviously acquiring DJ Moore. I don't think there's a lot of confidence in Velus Jones. Certainly as a return man, he could make an impact here, but it's really in Velus Jones's court at 26 years old to get in Justin Fields' court as a potential pass catcher here. You also have Dante Pettis, who can still play. If they keep 7, I'd expect that that's who it is. Joe Reed is here too. I just want to throw his name out there. Didn't work out for the Chargers, but in a different system that I think fits his kind of skill set better, where he's a real run-after-catch threat. Coming out of Virginia, I really liked him. If he happens to make this team, I think he could dethrone Velus Jones for the wide receiver 6 spot there. Maybe even Tyler Scott in year 1. So it is a very deep group of wide receivers with a nice diversity of skill sets, which I always love to see. But your tight end room's pretty good too. You got Cole Kmet, who is just a kind of possession bruiser, not a separator. You can put a linebacker on him and cover him up one-on-one pretty easily, but he'll find those soft spots in zones. He's going to pretty consistently fight for a few tough yardage after the catch. And he really has taken gains as a run blocker year in, year out since he got here. It's a contract year for him too. So he's a good starter. And then you have Robert Tonyan, who is a very nice complement as that wing tight end, as he was in Green Bay. If they go 12 personnel, he can block from the wing. He can be a lead blocker on wide zone, or, you can pull him into space. But he's also going to get lost on those classic Shanahan-style play-action crossers. Definitely going to bring you a little bit more juice than what they had at any tight end position or anyone in this tight end room last year. Those other guys are going to have to duke it out for a roster spot. Don't have too much to add on Tongas, Allen, or Carlson. It's a pretty weak running back room when it comes to established dynamism in the receiving game. Travis Homer, I think, will be the day 1 third down back because he's reliable in pass protection, has sure hands, and can do a little bit after the catch. But in an ideal world, either Khalil Herbert finds out or figures out how to operate in the receiving game, where he's really always struggled, just isn't a natural pass catcher or route runner, or Roschon Johnson can show the pass protection and show the routes and show that consistency to earn that third down running back job, which I think is in play. He did a good job of that at Texas, where they used both him and Bijan a lot in the passing game. Not the most fluid route runner or anything like that, but he is a natural hands catcher. So it's tough for rookie running backs to earn those third down looks right away, but I think it's possible for Roschon. Deontay Foreman's never been much of a pass catcher. Treston Ebner as well is an athlete, but unestablished in that aspect of the game. So it's a fun room. The potential's through the roof, really, with the weapons and the quarterback. They're going to rank 12th overall for weaponry. Certainly the potential to crack the top 10 fairly easily. It's just about getting these guys kind of heading in that positive direction sooner rather than later, because a lot of these guys are in contract years. But that group, obviously, between the quarterback and the receivers, is going to be the resounding source of optimism for this Bears team this year. As we get through the rest of the roster, there's still a lot of work to do, and it's not just about Justin Fields hitting. There's a lot of question marks as we go here. So I wanted to mix up the order of things here and actually get to the running back room, kind of focusing on the skill players still, and then transition to the offensive line. we'll see how this order goes. You can certainly let me know in the comments what order you prefer. But yeah, the running back room is going to rank 28th, but just like we've had with a couple of these running back groups like Houston and Washington, like, I don't look at this room and have any worries about this group. I think you have like several good running backs here. It just is a testament to how many good running back groups there are in the league. I will reiterate, like Damian Harris signed for $1.7 million. Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, and Kareem Hunt are all available free agents right now. Like, there are a million rooms just like the Chicago Bears, and it's hard to stand out, but there's still a good running back room, right? You have Deontay Foreman, who really broke out last year for the Carolina Panthers, had a great run game in front of him, but his kind of no-nonsense running style is really going to fit well with a lot of the inside zone and power stuff that they started doing with Justin Fields in the design QB run game. A lot more shotgun means less outside zone and more inside running, just naturally. And that's a great fit for Deontay Foreman. But he also was an effective outside zone runner with good vision in Tennessee the year before when Derrick Henry went down. So I do think he's going to lead the team in carries, at least in the first half of the season. But this is going to be a big rotation. You have Khalil Herbert, who does have good vision to run inside zone, but I think of him as that kind of set the edge speedster on outside zone, give him a toss with some lead blockers out in front. Like, he's going to bring the juice. And this is kind of a lesser turned around version of what Green Bay had with Luke Getsy. Khalil Herbert is Aaron Jones-esque in terms of skill set, and Deontay Foreman is A.J. Dillon-esque in terms of skill set. So I do think they ride these guys, and I think they have success. Obviously, things are going to get opened up with Justin Fields in the run game here. We'll look at this offensive line shortly. I think in terms of yards per attempt and overall efficiency, this is going to be a solid group. But when it comes to fantasy football, I'm staying as far away from this group as I possibly can. Best ball, you know, with underdog is a little bit of a different conversation because there's going to be weeks where one of these guys will have big weeks. But trying to guess which week that's going to be is going to be a very big headache if you draft these guys in standard fantasy leagues, especially once Roschon truly gets into the mix. And that could be week 1, it could be week 12, but I do think it's going to be at some point in this season where, unless, you know, Foreman's completely balling out and the Bears are front runners for the division, like in a best case scenario, maybe Roschon just takes a seat for the year. But I think in a more average expected route, Foreman's fine. But this team is, you know, struggling a little bit, and they want to see what they have in Roschon and discovering if they need to invest in this running back room for 2024. And once Roschon comes in, I'm excited to see him, man. I mean, I've said this, you know, he did crack my top 10 running backs list. That was a good pick in the 4th round, well worth it at that spot. But I had the opinion, like, if he did what like Zach Charbonnet did, and he transferred somewhere where he was going to get a large workload, he probably is viewed maybe even higher than Zach Charbonnet. I don't think that's crazy to say. You look at how good he was at breaking tackles at Texas, his size with good athleticism. Now, Charbonnet went out and did it and showed that production, but I think it's fair to say, like, it probably would have happened if that was Roschon. So you love his commitment to Texas to stay and be that role player, a team-first guy for that. Does he have the dynamic traits to be a top 5 or 10 running back in the NFL? No, probably not. But I think just like so many of these, you know, early day 3, late day 2 picks, Roschon can be a quality starter in the NFL as well. So again, it's a good running back room. 28th is a reflection of how deep this running back room is around the league, not a reflection of this Bears team having bad running backs. The reality is most teams have star runners, and none of these guys are stars. They're just good backs. Travis Homer, I don't think they're going to give him too many carries outside of like halfback draw on 3rd and long. And Treston Ebner is going to have to fight for a roster spot with the guys ahead of him. But let's spend a little bit more time talking about what Justin Fields brings to the table as a runner. So he's going to be behind just Lamar Jackson as far as what their threat in the design run game brings to the table for this team. And both guys are going to grade out for me as quote unquote elite threats in that area. And this to me was the biggest surprise in Justin Fields' evolution as a player last year. Not that I didn't view him as a great athlete at Ohio State, and not that I ever felt like he couldn't be a threat on design runs or anything like that, but you can't convince me that he didn't get better when he got to the NFL, and specifically last season, as far as speed and elusiveness and creativity as a runner. Like, you can't put together a highlight reel of Justin Fields in his couple years at Ohio State. You can't put together the types of runs that he's doing now against NFL competition. He was outrunning entire NFL defensive backs for long touchdowns last year, juking dudes, breaking tackles. He was a good runner at Ohio State. I didn't see this coming, and that's where it gets so exciting. He legitimately ran at that elite level, like Lamar Jackson did in his MVP season, like Michael Vick did in his prime. That is the type of runner in the design run game that you have here. And not only does that make him the likely candidate to be this team's leading rusher, I think another 1,000-yard season is certainly in play. And with this being a rotation with these running backs, I don't see the other guys getting 1,000 yards. But it's so much more than the raw numbers. It's really the numbers on the football field, as far as changing the math for defenses to try and stop this run game. Whether it's running an actual read option, which just from an X and O's perspective is designed to create a math advantage on the field, or just handing it off on inside zone or whatever you're trying to do, we saw defenses really getting flustered by the threat of Justin Fields keeping that thing and getting out in space. Because if he makes one or two guys miss, he can be gone. This play against the Packers is a great example. Hard to tell if this is a true read option or just inside zone, but you can see both the defensive back and Quay Walker focused on Justin Fields, and it opens up a huge gash in the run lane. So that's the type of overall multiplier that this has, and it's really the best asset that the Bears have for this offense right now. Now, let's look at this offensive line. It's a really interesting group, and it's not just about the receivers making improvements. You know, the offensive line certainly showed their struggles last year as well. I don't think it was quite as bad last year as people talk about, but there was certainly some ugly moments, and they're hoping to really fill this group out and avoid that weak link style of offensive line where you got one or two guys that can really ruin your game plan. Alex Leatherwood, looking at you. But let's go left to right. They're going to rank 20th in pass blocking overall and 23rd in run blocking, which is a good average group, which I think this team would take. And there's upside to exceed that as well. So at left tackle, Braxton Jones, I think as I was reviewing the film for the Bears, prepping for this video, he was the biggest pleasant surprise out of anybody that popped to me on all 22. I knew he had a good year. A 5th or a 6th round pick out of Southern Utah? Yeah, Southern Utah. And I'll be honest, I did one game of his. I didn't see him as some diamond in the rough. I will shout out our guest on today's show. Tried to tell us about Braxton Jones. I didn't listen. He's a really good left tackle, and he did it as a rookie out the gate. Clearly was just a diamond in the rough playing at a smaller school. And a huge shout out to Ryan Poles, who is an offensive lineman, for finding this guy. And that and getting DJ Moore might be the biggest reason you have faith in a guy like Ryan Poles, because it is not easy to find a quality starting left tackle in the 5th round of the draft. And there's no really athletic limitations. He can move in space. He had those impact blocks when they would pull him or ask him to go wide zone. And he was pretty polished in pass protection, which was the bill on him coming out. So with another year in an NFL weight room, with NFL facilities outside of Southern Utah's facilities, with obviously the gains in strength coaches, NFL offensive line coaches, I'm really excited to see what Braxton Jones can look like in year 2 with another offseason. Is he a guarantee to be a star? No, but you're really encouraged by him. And honestly, based on what I saw, I'm probably going to get hate for this. I don't know. We'll find out. I am more optimistic for the future and the upside of Braxton Jones than I am for Darnell Wright. And I think the Bears are obviously really encouraged as well because they made such a priority to say, no, we are going to get a right tackle and not mess with Braxton Jones. So I think the arrow is only pointing up for him, and I was so pleasantly surprised from finally really getting to dive into the film on him. I knew he graded out well, and Bears fans were excited about him, but I kind of got to truly see it, and I saw it. So what a find he was. And then you got Tevin Jenkins at left guard. Availability's been an issue for him. I think he's played like 700 snaps in 2 years, was a reason he fell into the second round of the draft. So it's hard to truly count on him. He's now going to be starting in his third different position in as many years. Came into the league as a tackle. There was some gripes between him and the staff. Finally bought in at guard last year, was really good. And now he's going to the left side of the line where we'll find out if he can play. The upside's there. I mean, he's a true mauler. Excellent play strength, grip strength. He sustains blocks, had really good pass protection technique at tackle, and I think that translates to guard. Not the most insane athlete as far as handling quick hitting pass rush moves with lateral agility and stuff, but overall, there's no reason Tevin Jenkins can't be like an all-pro guard. It's just about availability and consistently being there for them. So I do think the arrow is pointing up for Tevin Jenkins, but it is a question mark on how much they're going to get from him. I think that's fair. Cody Whitehair, probably not so much a question mark. You love his flexibility now to slide back into center where he started his career. He's fine. I did see a concerning number of inability to recognize and pick up blitzes from him last year and stunts. But overall, in one-on-one situations, I think he's a solid to good starter. Definitely getting up there in age. Going to be 31 now. Not going to be there forever. I don't think struggling to pick up stunts is going to continue to be an issue. I think it was just a fluky thing that hurt him last year at guard. Obviously, they're going to need him to be very sharp moving back to center to communicate all that stuff. But, there's not a ton to say about Cody Whitehair other than you're happy with him as a starting center. You're not popping champagne or anything, but you're cool with it. He's been a mainstay for this Bears offensive line. And then you got Nate Davis, who they bring in from Tennessee, a guy that's really struggled in pass protection throughout his career, but did have his best year last year in his fourth year in a contract year. He still wasn't a lockdown pass protector, and ultimately I think with Tennessee, trying to get a little bit away from the wide zone stuff where Nate Davis thrives with that get off and his ability to reach blocks and get guys on the move. I think long term they felt like they couldn't really justify paying him what the Bears could. It's something to keep an eye on as far as is he going to give them really good pass protection, or is he more of just a decent starter in that regard, giving them really good run blocking? But I'm never going to fault a team for paying up for offensive line, especially when you have a young quarterback that you're trying to get comfortable playing in structure and trusting that everything's going to hold up in front of you. So it was a very sound signing, and I do think he's the best thing they have as a run blocker. And they're going to be able to get him going on pulls and get him into space, lead blocking for these running backs and for Justin Fields, and help in that regard as well. And then hopefully wrapping up the starters here with Darnell Wright at right tackle. They moved down in the draft really twice, technically, when you think about it, and take him 10th overall. I'm going to be honest, it was a little bit rich for me. I think he's a very good tackle prospect, belonged somewhere in the first round. I thought 10 was a little bit rich, and it did sting to miss out on Paris Johnson, I think, who would have been amazing here. But as a consolation prize, and you did move down after you couldn't get Paris, talked yourself into Darnell Wright, and I understand. With the confidence that he could plug in at right tackle, knowing what you think you know about Braxton Jones, I suppose, I'm not trying to say it was a bad pick, but what I am saying is temper expectations a little bit. I've seen Bears fans saying he was the best tackle in the draft. He wasn't. He's not a guy that sustains run blocks. I'm worried about that. Did not grade out well as a run blocker for a reason. He lunges. He doesn't attach to guys. There's highlight reel blocks. If it's 4th and 1, he's going to be up there as far as right tackles that I want to just move a 4-eye technique and get me half a yard. But for a scheme that is going to want to run a lot of wide zone, Can he improve that run block technique to pay off top 10 gains? That's going to be something to keep an eye on. I like what you're getting in pass protection. Just as we've seen with so many rookie tackles, it's hard to know exactly what you're going to get from a rookie. I thought Evan Neal would be a lot better in his first year. I thought Andrew Thomas would be a lot better in his first year. Those guys took their lumps. I think Darnell Wright is a candidate to have some lumps as a rookie tackle, just as really every rookie tackle is. Charles Cross, same thing last year. Looked pretty good, but took his lumps. And I think Darnell Wright might have some ups and downs in his first year. Maybe he's the next Tristan Wirfs, and I'm wrong, and that's obviously fantastic. I didn't see that from him in his college tape. I thought he was a good first-round caliber tackle prospect that they took a little bit early, and the hype is getting a little bit crazy on. I think he's possibly their biggest question mark on the offense. It's just my opinion. We'll see how that plays out. I do think the upside's there, though, and if he hits, you've got a really good offensive line here. As far as the depth is concerned, I actually like Larry Borom quite a bit. I don't think it's absurd to say that he might be better right now than Darnell Wright. I'm not going to go quite that far, but Borom has played well at both left and right tackle. He's a guy that has gotten better each year. He has physical tools. I liked him coming out of Missouri as like a third-round developmental candidate. They get him in the 5th. I don't think we see him. I think they ride with Darnell Wright, who's going to have some success and maybe have some ups and downs, but not enough to bench him. But Borom could be one of those guys that hits free agency next year and is kind of like a surprising starter and could be a good player for someone someday. Alex Leatherwood is your next tackle down. He just is one of the worst pass protectors I've ever seen. It's why I flamed the Raiders for them taking him in the first round, and it's why he got sent here for nothing. He can run block, but if he's on the field, you better get that ball out quickly because he's a turnstile. You also have Kellen Diesch, who some people liked in the draft. I was worried about him being a little bit light and top-heavy, too tall, I should say, not top-heavy, where he invites guys into his chest and is just an easy target for bull rushers. I don't see that improving over time just because of his frame, but I guess some people liked him. He's a good athlete who could maybe overtake Alex Leatherwood for the backup tackle spot, which shouldn't be too hard to do. But as far as the interior depth, you still have Lucas Patrick, who was supposed to be a starter for them last year, dealt with some injuries, was a starter for a couple years in Green Bay. Really nice interior swingman to have. He can play all 3 positions on the interior offensive line. If someone goes down, you can survive with Lucas Patrick out there. It's just not quite as good as the other guys you have. But I expect with Jenkins, there's a good chance we see some Lucas Patrick at left guard because Jenkins just hasn't been able to get through a season. And again, he fell in the draft for injury red flags. You got Tyree Carter, who was taken as a developmental player last year, and then Doug Kramer. That should be your 9 with Leatherwood and Diesch, I think, competing for the 9th spot. Decent blockers as far as the skill players are concerned. They do have a fullback in Kari Blossingame, who's pretty solid. I'm excited to see what Chase Claypool can maybe do a little bit more from that kind of big slot wide receiver position. I think he could thrive there. And then Cole Kmet just keeps getting better every year. I think he's pretty solid. So, again, 20th for pass blocking, 23rd for run blocking. That's going to spit out the 22nd overall passing game and the 16th overall run game. Ultimately ending up 23rd for overall offense. I know the math always looks weird there, but you got to remember some teams are elite or higher than 16th in one regard, which the law of averages pushes those teams up a little bit. But anyway, there is no denying the upside of this offense. I have pointed out some of the potential downside as well. The front office has done their job. I'll put it that way. It's now on the players, the staff, to execute and develop together. I don't know if it's all going to come together this year, even in a best case scenario for this to be a top 10 offense. That's a very optimistic outlook. I would just say the maximum upside for all of these players would justify that. That's a lot of players to hit their maximum upside in 1 year, but it's a fun group. I'm excited to see this Bears offense. Not so much excited to see this defense as we go to the other side. There's things to like, but as we start with the defensive line, holy woof. Sure, it's better than what they had last year, and they brought some guys in here. But I really thought they would do even more with this defensive line, and they, for the most part, kind of avoided it. Minor free agent signing of DeMarcus Walker, Andrew Billings, Gervin Dexter in the second round, but this is like one of the lowest upside groups in the league and one of the lowest floors as well. They're going to rank 31st for me for pass rush, 28th for run defense, and there's really not even a ton of conversations to have here. A lot of these guys, I think, are just maxed out and are what they are, including their 4 starters. So Travis Gibson entering year 4 now. Definitely a disappointing year last year after his sophomore campaign was pretty good. I mean, he had a 87 pass rush grade in 2021 with 10 sacks on 27 pressures. Just disappeared in 2022. Had basically the same amount of pressures on 100 more snaps, but that sack total drops from 10 to 3. You just couldn't feel him out there. He was also getting blown off the ball against the run for a guy that does have some size. I think he's an adequate rotational third guy, but he's a starter here, and that's not going to fly. You're just not going to get consistent wins from him in either phase. Now, he's going to rotate there mostly with Dominique Robinson. I'm sure DeMarcus Walker will be a part of this rotation as well. Robinson was a 5th-round pick, always a huge developmental gamble on traits. He had his flashes last year. Maybe was even a little bit better than you'd expect, but a large part of that was he got so much playing time because this D-line sucked so bad. Most teams in the league wouldn't be playing a guy like Dominique Robinson, who needs to add play strength and learn different pass rush moves. He's the one guy on this entire edge group that I'm like, maybe he can be a starter, but that's a long way to go. And he's going to play, and we're going to get to see what he can do in year 2. But I mentioned DeMarcus Walker's the other kind of starter here. For this, like DeMarcus Walker's a fine player. I like DeMarcus Walker for what he is. He's a big-bodied edge guy. He can set the edge in the run game, and he can push the pocket a little bit. He's a really good player for stunts because he can blow up the guard and let the tackle loop, or he can line him up at 3 technique, and he can attack the tackle and let the edge player loop in. He's a useful NFL player. He's a third player that comes in off the bench, causes some chaos. He cannot be your best pass rusher, and that's what he is here. And what's crazy is that's really all that's worth talking about. I mean, you have Rasheem Green, who's a poor man's version of DeMarcus Walker, a big-bodied guy with physical tools that in multiple teams now has never reached his upside. And Terrell Lewis, who once upon a time I was excited about, but hasn't been able to stay healthy and hasn't even been good now when he's been out there. A guy out of Alabama that had a lot of pass rush moves, but hasn't been able to put him to use in the NFL. They need to add somebody and add somebody quick. It's a bummer that Danielle Hunter probably isn't available for the Bears in an interdivision trade, but I'd be making calls. I mean, we showed the Cardinals and they ranked 32nd. They're a whole nother type of joke, because at least you have some starters here. But for a team looking to take that next step, like the Bears are now in the second year of the Cardinals' plan, basically. They're now a year, the Cardinals are doing what the Bears did last year. You would hope to at least have someone you can point to and say, like, yeah, he's kind of a problem. You don't have that here, including the interior group. I like the Andrew Billings signing. Again, someone that should be your 3rd or 4th defensive tackle. He's a good run defender. He's a space eater up front. He can play the nose. He can be something they didn't have last year and open things up for Justin Jones a little bit, who was asked to play the nose and got destroyed there. That's not who Justin Jones is, and that's why he graded out so poorly last year. But he's not a disruptive player. He's not even an overwhelmingly consistent run defender. I mentioned Justin Jones a little bit. He's a true jack of all trades, master of none defensive tackle. If he's your 4th starter and someone that kind of rotates with another guy that maybe has a little bit more athletic juice on pass rush downs, you're fine with that. But to be really your best overall defensive lineman and your highest paid one here, gross. Maybe Walker makes more now, but I think it's still Jones. Bears fans can let me know, but that's kind of irrelevant. The one thing I really liked that they did was draft Gervin Dexter. I was a big fan of his prospects. He has one true weakness in his game, and I think it's very much fixable. But one of the most frustrating things I saw from any college player this year and ever, Gervin Dexter stands straight up after the snap. He got the worst get-off grade that I've ever given a defensive player. It is like He plays football as if nobody ever told him he's allowed to go when the ball is snapped. They say it was because Florida said just read and react. I get that. I think that played a factor quite clearly. There's nothing athletically that tells you he can't get off the ball. Matt Eberflus and Alan Williams in this group, they're going to have to teach him how to do that, and then the sky's the limit. Physically speaking, this guy is in the Chris Jones ballpark. He's got length and strength and quickness. The fact that he was able to be an effective player at Florida, despite that get-off, speaks volumes about his ability to win late and how physically dominant he can be. And there were very tiny flashes of things coming together where he was dominating dudes up front. So I like the pick. I like him going to a well-coached defensive unit. I don't expect it to all come together in year one. That feels a little bit unlikely. But as far as finding someone that can actually be an impact player down the road for you, I think they got one in Gervin Dexter. Excited to see what he looks like with different coaching, being asked to actually get off the ball. And then they took Zach Pickens after that in the third round. He's a gap shooter. He has really good get off. He had highlight wins on tape. Absolutely putrid run defender. But if you need a guy to take Billings off the field on 3rd and long and run twists in games with DeMarcus Walker and Dominique Robinson, you can scheme up some fun stuff with Zach Pickens, and I think he can have some effective moments. He reminds me a lot of like Jerry Tillery for that. And if you're taking Jerry Tillery in the 3rd round, it's still a reach, but not as bad as taking him in the 1st round. But just don't put him out there if the team has any interest in running the ball at all, because they'll go right at him. He'll be 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage, backwards, the wrong way, and you're going to regret that he was ever out there in the first place. They take Travis Bell in the 7th, an athlete out of Kennesaw State. I didn't have a lot of Kennesaw State tape sitting around, so we'll see if he's anything. And then some kind of hybrid edge interior 3-tech types in Andrew Brown and Jalen Holmes. I bet one of them makes it. Rasheem Green's kind of in that mix too. So like one of those 3 probably makes it, if not 2. They clearly want that bigger bodied edge guy. But yeah, I mean, this group's just not complete. It is what it is. They're going to struggle. They're going to hurt this defense's ability to do what they want to do. Certain teams are going to just dominate these guys up front. And I think it's going to be a big thing that ultimately probably holds this Bears team back. And I don't even know if you can argue that much. Now, it gets much better and optimistic with much more of a plan as you get into the second level of this defense with this linebacker group where they balled out. They, after already hitting on Jack Sanborn as an undrafted pickup last year, they go out and sign Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards to pretty big free agent linebacker contracts, especially with Tremaine Edmonds. Edmonds really broke out last year in a contract year, and it's crazy that he's still developing. He's still, the arrow is pointing up on him. It's the nature of this position in general, which is something I've talked about. It's kind of the hardest position, and certainly on the defensive side of the ball, to play right now with RPOs and play action and the way that these passing games are attacking the middle of the field. They just put these guys in such a bind, let alone having to face, the run game with Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson around the league. But even more so with a guy like Tremaine Edmonds, 20 years old coming into the league. Like, he's just had to learn the position. And really, by the end of last year, it felt like things were clicking into place. He was flying all over the field. He was awesome in that Dolphins playoff game. Man, I don't know if the Bills beat the Dolphins without some of the defensive stops he made. That game was tight, man. So I love this signing. He definitely brings a little bit more of an enforcer personality than what they had in like Roquan. He's not the player Roquan was, but a really good signing that's going to make this second level of the defense a strength, along with TJ Edwards, who honestly is not that far behind Tremaine Edmonds as an overall linebacker. Now, Edmonds can just do things, physically speaking, that TJ Edwards can't. Edwards ultimately went undrafted because he's not particularly fast or fluid in his athletic movements like Tremaine Edmonds is at his size. But he's one of the smartest, most physical linebackers in the entire league. He's got that Big Ten, Wisconsin defensive high IQ, high physicality approach to the position, and it shows down in, down out. They're going to love his consistency, his leadership, making sure everybody's lined up, taking on pullers in the run game. He plays at full speed. His full speed isn't what most linebackers is around the league, but most linebackers around the league aren't able to play at full speed like TJ Edwards does, if that makes sense, because he is a half step ahead, and he plays with that confidence. And that even shows up in coverage from time to time. He's kind of bouncy in zone coverage. He understands where quarterbacks are trying to navigate, use their eyes to force navigation of linebackers like TJ Edwards. He doesn't get moved off the spot, and he does disrupt passes. Now, you don't want him covering running backs out of the backfield or tight ends man-to-man, but that's why they signed Tremaine Edmonds, right? So these guys are going to play really well off of each other. They rank 6th for overall run defense, 11th for coverage. Neither are perfect players. Edmonds is still coming along as far as his ability to break down the run game and be in the right place at the right time without losing discipline. And Edwards is just capped as far as his coverage upside because of some of that athletic ability. But man, they're gonna get these guys two playing in unison, and Matt Eberflus is gonna feel so much more comfortable calling what he wants to call with these guys in the middle of the field. Now, what's interesting is they probably didn't need to sign TJ Edwards. I'm not saying it was a bad signing, but Jack Sanborn kind of played like TJ Edwards as an undrafted linebacker. Both extremely similar players, both out of Wisconsin, both fall because of athletic limitations. Both guys undrafted basically show that they can play right away because their IQ is high. I mean, just copy and paste everything I said about TJ Edwards. Jack Sanborn maybe even looked better than a young TJ Edwards. So I don't know if they had to sign TJ Edwards. I'm not going to complain about it. But you have another one of those guys. So if they want to get into their base defensive looks, which I don't expect to happen a lot, but if they want to come out with 3 linebackers, you can have basically 2 TJ Edwards out there. I really was impressed by Jack Sanborn's tape, another guy that I knew was getting playing time and getting hype, and I saw him pop occasionally on the broadcast footage, but when I really got into the All-22 prepping for this series, I wish I captured more footage because I didn't expect to spend so much time talking about him, knowing that they basically replaced him. So I got through my film study and I was like, dang, I wish I would have captured all those highlights because he was sensational for an undrafted linebacker, and you're very happy that he's your third. You also have Dylan Cole, who's bounced around the league. He can do a little bit of everything. They draft Noah Sewell in the 5th round. Whatever, he's a thumper as well. I don't really see him becoming a better player than TJ Edwards or Jack Sanborn, but he has a similar eye for the game and a similar skill set. I think they see a lot of Jack Sanborn in Noah Sewell, so I wouldn't be surprised with what they like here if he plays well, if he ever got on the field. But I did think he was extremely tight, and I wasn't the biggest fan of his game. And then they bring in some other lighter, more fluid linebackers like Weatherford and Baskerville as an undrafted pickup. But yeah, it's a good linebacker room. And I think if Edmonds continues to climb, the sky is literally the limit for Tremaine Edmonds. If the game continues to speed up or slow down rather for him with Eberflus, with what he's shown he can do with these linebackers, that's really where you could get into the elite linebacker conversation for him. It just takes time for most linebackers. I wouldn't be stunned if by the end of the year we're like, yeah, Tremaine Edmonds is a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. Right now, I think he's more top 10-ish. So definitely not concerned about that group. And honestly, I'm really not concerned about this secondary. It's just a lot of unproven talent, kind of like some of these other secondaries we've talked about. They're going to rank 20th, and I'm pretty optimistic for this group ultimately. But in reality, I just can't rank them too high because it is an unproven group. But Jalen Johnson, very much proven as a quality starter on the outside, that he had his best year last year. He's not the fastest guy or twitchiest guy, but he's physical, can definitely bang with receivers down the field. He can find the ball when it's in the air. Not overly grabby, but the physical aspect is there for him. He's going to get flagged. It's just part of the beauty of the beast here. But yeah, I feel very solid about him. Contract year, should be locked and loaded as a quality starter there. Tyreek Stevenson, one of my guys in this draft. I said earlier, one of my favorite picks for any team in the draft. I said it before the draft. I was like, this guy reminds me so much of some corners that have fallen into the 2nd round, specifically Christian Fulton and Tyson Campbell. really good, lengthy, physical man-to-man corners who didn't test out of the gym, but are going to be quality starters in the NFL. Maybe never superstars, but he's very Jalen Johnson-esque. Honestly, you could lump Jalen Johnson into that mix, even though Jalen played a lot more zone at Utah. But I think they found a day one starter. He's already getting buzz, and one of the players on this Bears team I'm most excited to watch. And potentially an even better part of this pick is it will allow them to put Kyler Gordon at his natural position of slot corner. Always felt like Kyler needed to play slot. Not only is he a super physical guy that thrives in that position group that they ask those guys to come down and fit the run and tackle and play physical. He loves to do that stuff. But he doesn't have great long speed. He doesn't have size, was just never really built to play on the outside. They didn't do it a ton at Washington. I didn't think it should happen at the NFL. And the Bears, in his rookie season, unfortunately asked him to play all over the field. And he had a lot of struggles. The vast majority of those struggles were when he played outside. When he got to play in the slot, especially a lot of those zone drops where he's a really smart player. I mean, he got Jalen Hurts a couple times. He really has high potential as a slot corner to maybe be like this team's Kenny Moore, who obviously emerged as one of the top slot corners in the NFL under Matt Eberflus's defense. So I'm really optimistic about this cornerback trio. Again, unproven, but by year's end, could definitely be a top half of the league cornerback trio. And then let's just round out the starters before we visit the depth, because there is some interesting depth here for sure. But you got Eddie Jackson, not a ton to really add about him, a mainstay, balanced veteran stud safety. He had that huge all-pro season in the Fangio defense, has never been able to get back to that level. It's just hard to find that level of opportunity to make plays on the ball, but overall, he's more often than not in the right place at the right time. You can run single high with him. You can go two shell, quarters, buzz him down where he's probably at his best. He can even man guys up. He's still the best player they have back here. He's not a superstar, but he's a stud. And then Jaquan Brisker is a very nice complement to that. He's a little bit more of a physical-minded safety, really good at manning up tight ends. Really often when they would put running backs and tight ends out, when opponents would put those positions out wide, he would follow them out and play wide corner, and he was locked down in those situations. So he's a guy that can match up in those short to intermediate assignments. He can definitely play two shell when they go to cover two. When they go cover three, it's going to be Eddie Jackson, with Jaquan, for the most part, being more of that lurker. Very similar player to Adrian Amos, who came out of Penn State, came to Chicago, mid-round pick. That's kind of the career trajectory for Jaquan Brisker right now. I think he could very much have an Adrian Amos-esque career. Just has to go out and prove it a little bit more. He definitely had his ups and downs in coverage, which is expected for a rookie safety. I think we see some growth there, and that's going to pair well with an overall young secondary. Now, I mentioned the depth. You do still have Kendall Vilder, who I don't think is a lock to lose out to Tyreek Stevenson, but I think that's expected at this point. Vilder was solid for the first 10-ish games of last year before he got hurt. I've always liked Kendall Vilder. He's one of those guys where, you know, he's sitting there in the fifth round and you're like, yeah, let's gamble on athletic ability at the corner position and just see where it comes in a couple years. And I think we've seen some of the growth. The playmaking's been there for him. Very up and down as far as coverage consistency and run defense as well. You're not as excited if he does win the job, because that's probably speaks worse about how I feel about Tyreek Stevenson. But there's some potential there, and I think they use him in dime looks. I'm projecting him to be the next highest snap getter among this defensive back group, but I don't think that's a guarantee, because you have Jalen Jones, who, for what it's worth, played pretty solid for an undrafted corner. He's 25 years old, coming out of the SEC. He was fine. Not a great athlete, did have his losses, but had some good wins on there as well. As a fifth corner, I think you're fine with that. Now, they also draft Terrell Smith out of Minnesota, a freaky athlete with incredible upside. Not the best reactionary quickness and instincts at the position. When he's on the trail and a receiver snapped his route off, you wanted Terrell Smith to react and squeeze those routes much quicker. Not a huge playmaker at Minnesota, but the athletic tools are there, and with the right coaching, maybe that can come along in year 2. But I'm not expecting much from him in year 1, and if he's playing, I think things went wrong. They also pick up Michael Ojemudia, who's kind of like a poor man's version of Jalen Johnson coming out, where he played a lot of cover 3 at Iowa. Not a great athlete, but a physical guy on the outside. I wouldn't be stunned if he sticks around here, but that probably means either Vilder or Jones didn't make it. I don't know how consequential that is. And then you got Josh Blackwell, Greg Stroman. Blackwell was, I think, another undrafted guy that got some playing time last year, but wasn't anything special. The safety depth is much less interesting. You have Elijah Hicks, a 7th-round pick last year, I think, out of Cal. Minor flashes in his rookie year. And Kendall Williamson, an athletic developmental type out of Stanford. A.J. Thomas, Adrian Colbert. You got to keep Jackson and Brisker healthy. Otherwise, you're probably exploring the free agent block to see what else you might be able to find. But I'm optimistic for this secondary. There's probably going to be some week-to-week ups and downs as you've got some young players. But I think it's a really fun unit, and I'm excited to see this group grow together. I just wish they were helped out by the pass rush a little bit more. You know, this defense is pretty much carried, quote unquote. They're going to rank 29th overall, but they're carried by theoretically good coaching and a linebacker duo and some promise in the secondary. But there's obvious concerns that this defense is going to put them in compromising situations again. I think they're a year away, if not 2, from this roster being where Matt Eberflus wants it to be. And that's just going to put a ton of pressure on an offense that already has some question marks. So this is a volatile team. I think they have a wide range of outcomes. I could see them picking number 1 next year and taking Caleb Williams if Fields doesn't hold up his end of the bargain. I could see them winning this division. If Fields hits, this defense holds up okay. Man, that is a spectrum, a much larger spectrum than we've had, I think, with these last few teams. Now, as we wrap things up, as far as special teams are concerned here, where, of course, they rank 23rd on the offense, 29th on the defense, special teams is fine. You know, Trenton Gill, rookie punter last year. Cairo Santos is a kicker last year. No prominent returners. You don't have Devin Hester walking through that door. They had some lumps on special teams, so... You know, special teams only gets 1% of the total rankings here. It is what it is, but they're in that tier 4 of fine special teams. I do like, as we look at their strengths and weaknesses, the one nice thing is, outside of the defensive line, I don't think they have glaring weaknesses. It's just some critical positions that have unproven talent. I think Justin Fields is unproven as a passer. I think the offensive line is rather unproven. And I think, obviously, at cornerback, you're very unproven. Very critical positions for this team's success. That's just going to add a lot of variance, especially when you have a horrible pass rush up front. But they have a lot of strengths that just make a lot of sense in how this team has been crafted over the last 500 days or so. You've got the Justin Fields factor. They're building around that with this diversified group of weaponry that everybody has their role within this scheme. It's going to make things so much more seamless and easy to apply play calling and development. And then you go to the defensive side of the ball. Theoretically, this should be a really coached defense with great linebackers, and everything makes sense with the secondary where everybody's got their defined roles with Johnson and Stevenson on the outside, Gordon in the slot, your safety tandem. If they can just manufacture some bit of a pass rush by running games and blitzes and stunts up front, you've really got a pretty balanced team here, honestly, with just a lot of youth that needs to grow together. But before we introduce EJ to the deep dive here, let's look at their schedule. So Vegas has some tricky numbers here. There's 7.5 wins on their over-under. So this is the first team we've had get over 6.5. They are 4th in their division as far as odds to win. And I do think that's right. It's all about Justin Fields, man. It really is. And until we know what he is, trying to bet on this team is going to be really difficult. Like, if you're a huge believer that Justin Fields is going to be that Jalen Hurts-esque leap, those are pretty good odds to take, right? if you're like me and you're a little bit more skeptical about it, you're probably not making this bet. But I'm not really betting against that happening either because the upside is there with this team. As you go down the board, their schedule's really not bad. Like, if a few things go right, it's very reasonable that this team could win the division. They get Green Bay at home, the big Jordan Love, Justin Fields battle. You're really only significant underdogs in 3 games on this schedule. I think at Kansas City, obviously, is a likely loss. At the Chargers is going to be tough. And at the Browns, week 15 is going to be tough. Beyond that, you're looking at probably anywhere from 3-point favorites to 3-point underdogs in the rest of your games, because you've got the NFC South, which is a poor division, and your own division isn't all that good. You have that 4th place schedule, so you get the Cardinals as opposed to the Seahawks or the Niners, which is great. And then you have to lump in the Raiders as well from that AFC West tour. So it's a very winnable schedule, if you will. Their win projection for me comes out right at 7.5 wins. I'm staying away from betting on this Bears team. And man, it's going to be fun to see kind of where the development lies and at how many positions that it happens at. So I fully understand the excitement for this team, Bears fans. I'm going to say my goodbyes now and turn to the interview with EJ. But before we do, thank you so much for watching. Drop your comments down below what you think of the analysis here, if you're enjoying the series. And of course, please do hit that like button. But let's now welcome EJ Snyder into the deep dive. And now I'm thrilled to welcome in a new guest to the deep dive series, EJ Snyder of the Bootleg Football Podcast. EJ, we had your co-host Brett come on to represent his Texans. You get to represent the Chicago Bears for, is this year 2 or year 3 coming on now?
This is year 2. I was on last year with my partner from Bears Over Beers, JB. We did it in tandem. That was super fun. But I can't thank you enough. This is it's a really nice cameo. I love this series.
Yeah, and we're excited to have you. Always fun talking football and definitely talking some Chicago Bears with you. Always some fun kind of Packers Bears banter in there.
Yep.
So yeah, this team is, they definitely have some hype, to say the least. I mean, just poking around Twitter and all the expectations with Justin Fields. So going to be fun to get your perspective on this thing. I wanted to start with the NFL draft and get your thoughts on maybe a couple of your favorite picks where they came in on the Telecaster and you were like, oh, yes, I'm so excited about that. And then if there were any picks where you were kind of like, yeah, I kind of wish we would have gone a different direction. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, for favorite picks, Roshan Johnson was a favorite of mine through the pre-draft process. And strangely enough, when he got picked, I was on some other riff on our live stream and the chat was like, EJ, Roshan's a Bear. And I was like, I didn't see it for like 2 minutes. And then I finished my thought and I was like, yes. I really like his skill set. I think he's going to be amazing. We'll talk about the backfield a little bit, but that was definitely one. I thought Darnell Wright was a really good pick. It was hard. The Bears really felt like they needed a right tackle, and he felt like the best right tackle in the class. Maybe not the best tackle, but the best right tackle. So I felt like that was a good fit. And mostly I realized that my pre-draft hesitation about that was where they were going to get him. I certainly didn't want him at 1. There's talk of them moving down to 3. There was talking, they moved down to 9. They eventually moved down to 10 and they get Darnell Wright. And I was like, oh, okay, that feels right. That feels good. Tyreek Stevenson I like a lot. I didn't necessarily think they would pick him, but I like the fit. And I love the Stevenson. Fit. And I love the fit across from Jalen Johnson because now they have 2. And that allows them in that Eberflus Allen Williams defense to do some things that they weren't able to do last year. And then Jervin Dexter, I really like as a player. And they have a great need there. We'll talk about how they filled needs throughout the draft, but I really liked him as a player. I know there was a lot of stuff, hue and cry about his first step. I remember you had some questions about that, and it came out that, hey, he was being asked to stand up and just read what was going on.
Yeah.
And sounds like the Bears are going to turn him loose. Sounds like the Bears are not going to ask him to do that. They're going to ask him to penetrate. In fact, they don't even have him listed as a nose tackle. They have him listed as their defensive tackle, or really what you'd consider their 3 tech in a 4-3. And I think he's going to surprise some people. So probably in that order, Roschon Johnson, Wright, Stevenson, and Dexter. The only pick that I was sort of less wild about, up high that really mattered was Zach Pickens. I think he has a path to being good. This isn't anti-Zach Pickens. And I see what they were thinking. They're really thinking he's a nose tackle, which I think is kind of reversed with him and Dexter, but that's the way they have him listed. That's the way they have him lined up right now in the
At
very
295?
preliminary picture. I don't think he's going to be 295.
Yeah.
But they like his strength. I saw him more as a penetrator and less as a gap and a half run stopper. We'll see how that all works out. I see potential with him, but to me, that one felt early. It was in that clump of picks they had from like 54 to 62. There was 3 right there. Kind of felt underwhelmed about the 3 really as the sort of weight just with who was on the board. And Pickens was the one of the 3 that I probably would have picked somebody else. Could have even been another position just based on value. I see where they're going, but I just felt like there was better value at that spot. So not anti-Zach Pickens, just sort of anti-draft value.
Yeah, it was certainly interesting to me that they kind of avoided that edge group. And we'll definitely get into the front 4 a little bit. But yeah, Stevenson was the one guy, like the Packers fan in me was like, shit. Like that guy's going to be so perfect there. They needed that. And it's like one of those deals where you upgrade at 2 and you upgrade at 3. Cause I think Kyler Gordon moving back into the slot is like, that's where he's going to thrive in my opinion. So that was the one I was like, what a good pick. I do want to with Darnell Wright, where did you have Darnell Wright pre-draft? I know you said, super high in the draft, you were hesitant, but at 10, you were okay with it. Cause for me, I had him OT 5 actually. Now turns out I'm probably going to be wrong about DeJuan Jones. I just had a good feeling about him. Something's going on there. But I felt a little bit like he kind of fell off his blocks a little bit in the run game. Like there was impact blocks and highlight blocks for sure. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to come in and like sustain blocks consistently, I was a little bit worried about that. I think he'll be just fine as a pass protector. But yeah, like what did you think about, him as a prospect coming in? And it sounds like you weren't too underwhelmed by it, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I had him at either OT3 or OT4. I'll have to look. I think it was 4. But again, in terms of, I'm not a huge believer, but I would say I'm a big believer in, look, if a guy has excelled at a spot and he's really good at it, some guys are ambidextrous and some guys will tell you it's no problem. When we were talking to Chandler Zavala at Shrine Bowl, we asked him that question. He said, no, it's no big deal. I've played left. I've played right. It's fine. Other guys are like, nah, it's not a thing. Like, leave me where I've been or leave me on the side I've been, certainly, so I don't have to change my footwork and everything else. So some people are okay with it. Some people aren't. You don't know until you talk to him. But in terms of he's demonstrated he can be a right tackle, I felt the best about him out of the top group. The other 3, I would say, in that top 4, I felt like they're probably better suited at left tackle. Some of them have played right even in their career, but I felt like their ceiling was probably better at left. For him, I felt like if he becomes a right tackle, he's a really solid fit there. I think he's an excellent pass protector. I think he showed that against the top rushers in this class that everybody gushed about. And he's not, let me say he's not typical or prototypical in his pass sets. He has a little bit of his own flavor, and there's a lot of different ways to get the job done. And we see that there are a lot of different tackles in the NFL with different styles. There's guys that are hulks that don't move their feet but have power and long arms, and they're not letting you go. And then there's guys that are pure technicians and speed guys. And there's just a lot of different ways. The way he's able to do it with the tools that he has was very effective against the best pass rushers in this class week after week. And most people thought, oh, he's a crushing run blocker because of those highlights. It turns out if you look at his overall season grades, he's a better pass blocker than he is run blocker. And he has room to grow as a run blocker. And I'm okay with that because I think the Bears said, look, we don't want Justin getting crushed. Like he's been banged up a lot. We want a guy that needs less work pass blocking, and we can work on run blocking. He's certainly got the physical skills to run block. And I think he has the want to as well. Tennessee's offense, a little bit different there. We'll see what he has. I think people will be pleasantly surprised by his run blocking. But as a pass blocker, he's going to come in and be, I think, one of the most ready tackles as a right tackle in this class.
Yeah, very, very good. So I know you're a big UDFA nerd.
Yes.
Like when I
Guilty
think
as
of
charged.
people who just dive as deep as they can into UDFAs, you're definitely one of the first people that come to my mind. So was there anybody on this team that did excite you?
The UDFA haul this year did not excite me. It felt like they did a really good job in free agency and they had their targets picked out and organized in a way that makes a lot more sense now that I've gone through and again, sort of picked apart their season and performance. When free agency was unfolding, I hadn't done that yet. And so there were a couple moves I was like, first, really? You're going to do that
Mm-hmm.
first? And then I went back and I was like, oh, yeah, you needed to do that first.
Yeah.
And then they did the draft. What I think they came together with a very solid draft, and again followed that plan and filled in the holes that they hadn't filled in free agency. And then it kind of, to me, and I'm not saying they did, felt like they kind of mailed in UDFA. There really wasn't anybody that really. Some people get excited about Tyson Bagent. I'm not going to. If he cracks the roster, I'd be really surprised. The only guy that sort of pricked my radar up in all the guys they got was Micah Baskerville, the linebacker from LSU. I don't see him making an impact. I see him being a practice squad guy. I felt like
Mm-hmm.
he was Jack Sanborn light, and Jack Sanborn was a UDFA. So that's light, which means, hey, he's going to have to earn his way onto the practice squad. Again, they invested very heavily in linebacker, so his path to playing time is not clear, but there's something there on tape. I like some of his skills on tape. He needs some refinement, but that was about it. Like, and if that's all I get out of, as a guy that gets really excited about UDFAs, if that's all I get out of like whatever it was, 12 or 13 guys that they picked up, there wasn't a ton there. Doesn't mean I'm all seeing and all knowing. Some of those guys could turn out to be good players.
Right.
But when I look down based on my evaluations, there was like Bagent, who people got excited about, not necessarily me. And then there was Baskerville, who not a lot of people knew about, but I was like, he could be good in a couple of years in the right system, but that's about it.
Cool. Yeah, fair enough. Let's transition a little bit to some of the existing players and the existing players. Justin, the existing player that everybody
Yes.
is going to be all eyes on to see really what can happen this year with Justin Fields, obviously. And it's so easy. Like the first thing that comes to my mind is the Jalen Hurts jump last year. And, we know what Fields is as a runner. He's premium, elite, top 1, 2, 3, whatever you want to call. But as far as a passer, it's very clear that like there's a long way to go still. But you obviously look at the existing core last year and say, just like we've seen with the Jalen Hurts, give him a number one receiver, AJ Brown, and more coming in now. Like that's great. But what from Justin Fields' perspective, from his end, do you think he needs to do to take some of those big leaps next year?
Yeah, it is a two-part evaluation or question. I think a lot of people aren't able to separate what happened last year from who Justin Fields really is as a passer. And if you look at that sort of honestly and see what he had to work with, both time to throw in terms of clean pockets, in terms of separation from receivers that you would expect in the NFL, he didn't have a lot to work with. And he didn't necessarily always do a great job with what he did have to work with, but it was so a clean pocket with people separating was so inconsistent that there's no rhythm there. And that's very difficult
Yeah.
as a player. I think both of those upgrades, we talked about Darnell Wright. They also brought in Nate Davis. They get, Cody Whitehair moving back to center, and you get stability, hopefully on paper, on the line. And even if they play at a mid-tier level, maybe they're the 18th best line in the NFL or the 15th, like that's fine. That's such a massive upgrade from where they were last year in terms of consistency in the pass game to let Justin do what he needs to do. And then you go out and get a legit number one. And then you go out and get a pass catching tight end too. And then if you're looking at, 4 wide receivers across, you have 4 NFL pass catchers across, hopefully. That's a whole different sort of stage to start the evaluation on. In terms of what Justin needs to control, he's already building that rapport with DJ Moore, which is super important. Chemistry between quarterback and receiver is, I think, an underrated thing, and he hasn't had it for the first couple of years. I really hoped he was going to develop it with Allen Robinson, but Allen Robinson was checked out the year that Justin started. The coaching staff wasn't committed to him. Like, there's just a lot of shit,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
That last year was
And
so ugly with him.
it was not good. So he has receivers. He's building rapport. He has a full off season with them, including guys like Chase Claypool. He has a line that should allow him a little bit more time. he needs to relax and trust. And that's going to be very difficult because he's been absolutely shellacked for the past couple of seasons. And he's going to have to understand that the line's going to do their job and he gets to do his job, and he doesn't have to do both anymore. And he did last year. And
Yep.
that's going to be a mental thing that he has to get over. I think he can do it, but it's going to take some show me. And then he's got to be more consistent on the short game. Footwork and timing. It's really more of a keeping his base. He is such a dynamic athlete that he doesn't always set on the easy stuff, the layups, and he needs to, because he doesn't always deliver those balls in the place that is best for his receivers, his backs, to go make yardage or to sort of have the play go as it's drawn up. If he can do that consistently in the short game, we've seen his deep ball. His deep ball is really good. And it's going to get better again as he understands that he has time. He has the physical tools to get it there without a problem. If he gets guys with a step and separation, we'll see how he does. He hasn't always been great with leads, but again, that comes back to chemistry and having the same guys in the lineup. Injury's been a thing. I mean, I was really high on Byron Pringle last year. I was like, he's the one guy in the group besides Darnell Mooney I think could play. He doesn't play basically at all. He plays, the last 6 games. So a little bit of consistency, both from his supporting cast and a little bit of consistency in his footwork and setup in the short to medium, the sort of layup game. I think he'll be able to surprise a lot of people. There are a lot of people we put out a video this morning, and one of the first comments we got was, guys, they weren't tanking. Justin's just terrible. And I believe the comment was, he's the worst player that's still getting playing time in the league. And I was
talking about Justin Fields.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, again, that's people not being able to separate situation and player. And, being a guy that does a lot of scouting, I have to do that all the time. There are bad college systems with good college players and vice versa. So I'm more used to it and maybe slightly ahead of the curve there, a lot of people. But I think if things go well and people stay healthy, he's going to surprise a lot of people. Is he going to be the number 1 quarterback in the league? I don't think he is. Is he going to be a lot farther along than people think he is right now? I think he probably will be.
Yeah, I think that the trust is so big and underrated when we talk about quarterbacks, because it's like you watch his film and there's, like you said, there's so many times where there's nothing there. And that just destroys his faith in that the next time it is there, that he can go through his process and be ready for it. Because when you watch his film, that really is where he leaves the meat on the bone. Is, okay, there actually was structure there. You're looking at the guy. You have protection. Let it rip. Get it to him. You don't have to panic and get out of this situation. Like, that's going to really be the biggest thing to watch. And I love what you said about the short game too. I was going to ask you about the play calling, but I did just listen to you and Brett's breakdown, and you guys really got into it. So I think we can honestly just tell people, go watch your Bears breakdown, because you guys get into all of the coaching and you have a great breakdown of the run splits and all that. So honestly, just go watch the bootleg show and check out a little bit of the conversation about the play calling. But I do want to keep it in-house with this group of weaponry, specifically with Chase Claypool, because I think he's the one that you're going to be a little bit more wishy-washy on. Like, I think, Mooney's going to do his thing. We expect DJ Moore to do his thing, but Chase Claypool was such a train wreck acquisition for this team. There's really no other way to say it. But what did you see from him? And is it a lost cause, or like, what are you kind of expecting from Chase Claypool this year?
It's a great question, because it was a train wreck, and I think it has more to do with timing and the situation. Nobody's ever happy when their original team says, see ya, for whatever reason, whether they don't get re-signed, whether they get traded. Most people are not happy about that. If they did, their team was a train wreck. Pittsburgh was okay. So Claypool certainly was smarting from that a little bit and trying to come over mid-season and establish all the things we were just talking about. Establish a chemistry, understand a whole new language. When, Claypool was drafted by Pittsburgh, that's the only system he's known. Like, he knew 2 systems there, but their system was the only system he knew.
And it's a really different system, not to cut you off, but
yes,
it's very different.
You're correct.
Yeah.
And it is, people equate it all the time to learning languages, and there are languages that are more like each other, and then there are languages that are not like each other. And I feel like he was trying to learn a language that was very unlike what he knew. He was also trying to learn into a system, and we've talked about the rest of the chaos, right? There are times when he could run the limited routes they gave him, beat his guy and be open and turn around and the lines collapsed and Justin's running for his life. And he's like, well, hell, like, what did I do that for? So it didn't look good really in any way. And there was a lot of pressure because of the pick they gave up was fairly high. And Chicago's been starved for a wide receiver for a while. And even in last year's draft, people were like, if they don't pick wide receiver with the very first pick, I'm out. I'm done. They were that sort of over it. And so here comes this, big, fast guy that was well thought of, that played locally, if you want to, at Notre Dame. And, everybody's like, second round pick, let's go. We got a number one. And it's like, easy on that. But they weren't going to go easy on that. So again, throwing 2022 out because it was a mess on multiple fronts. They wanted to see a little bit what he had, but they just had to limit that. Like, they had to give him so little, and he didn't really mesh well with the offense. We talked about why that happens. With a full off season, a whole bunch more time with Getsy and Justin, I think he's going to be more comfortable. I still want to temper expectations. He's not going to come out and be 1A, right? He's probably not even going to be 2 on this team.
Right.
He's probably going to be 3, and I'm totally cool with that. Like, Chase Claypool as your number 3, as a big slot, as a power slot, as a guy that can stretch the seam and take a safety down the field is a good thing, right? Forget all the what pick they gave for him and what the pre-draft hype was and what he did or didn't achieve in Pittsburgh. Like, that role for him, which is probably the role he's going to occupy in this offense, is really good. And I can see a world where he is a very good number 3. Now, if I asked you who the best number 3 in the NFL or some of the top number 3s in the NFL were, in your opinion, who are the names that come to mind as like guys that are third on their team but still pretty good?
Yeah, like Curtis
like
Samuel,
Tyler
I
Boyd.
just did for Washington.
There you go.
I mean,
he's solid.
That's not
right?
the best 3, but I mean, Tyler Boyd, Cincy.
Tyler Boyd comes to mind, right?
Russell
Now,
Gage,
Tyler
Tampa.
Boyd.
Jaden Reed, Green Bay.
We'll see. We hope.
Yeah.
You hope.
Yes,
I
sir.
actually hope to. I really like Reed.
Yeah, I love Reed.
But, Tyler Boyd, everybody's like, yeah, he's a really good number 3. I think it's pretty universal that he's in that top group of probably 5 number 3s. And, Tyler Boyd gets like 75 catches and like 750 yards a year with a few touchdowns sprinkled in. And everybody goes, yeah, that's great. I could see Claypool getting 45-ish catches and 650 to 700 yards.
Yeah.
And that being like awesome as, hey, you got Mooney covered, you got DJ covered, maybe you covered Kmet if you're worried about that. And then, you left Claypool 101 with your second safety. Go for it, and look, Justin can hit him. So I can see that ironing out and being a great success. Whereas if people are thinking 1,000 yards or bust, 80 catches or bust, has to be a 1A or bust because we gave a 2 for him, he's never probably going to reach that. And you're always going to be disappointed. But if he plays this role and plays it well, it is something that's going to stress defenses. And he could be considered, at least in my eyes at that point, a success.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a realistic outlook on that. Okay, what about the running back room? Who's your day one? I'm not even going to say starter. I'm going to say who gets the most carries week 1 against the Packers, and then who gets the most carries. I don't know who they play week 18, but who gets the most carries in week 18
by the end of the year? Yeah. This is great, and my answer is no idea, and that's awesome. Like, I love this running back room. This is a great room on this team. This is probably the strongest position group room on this team. And that is awesome. That is a tremendous place. They're legit 4 deep, right? 3 as primary contributors. And the 4th is both a great special teamer, a great pass protector, and a pretty good receiver. Like, this is a diverse and really powerful room. It's a great position for the Bears to be in. I think Foreman's probably the starter because they lean on inside zone and duo. And if you look at Foreman down the stretch last year, he and Nick Chubb from week 8 on were identical. And it wasn't because Nick Chubb was terrible. Like, it wasn't one of those, he was hobbling and this guy did great, and so you're comparing him. No, like, Nick Chubb was Nick Chubb. And Jonta Foreman, after the Panthers decided, hey, we're just going to run the shit out of the ball, was step for step. Like, their stat lines are identical. Now, I'm not saying Foreman is Chubb. He's not. But behind a very good run blocking line, and the Bears' run blocking was second in EPA per play in the NFL last year, as surprising as that is, it's true.
Yeah.
even with that crap line, they could run the ball. A lot of that was Justin, but it wasn't all Justin. Like Foreman's going to enter into the system that Getsy likes to run, and he's going to be the hammer right off, and he can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Khalil Herbert is great for explosion. He can come in. He was, he was 20th in the NFL in explosive runs, while he was 41st in carries. So super efficient in terms of creating explosive plays, and that is a great change of pace back. He's been working on his pass blocking. What I think is really interesting is who's going to be the quote unquote receiving back, because both Foreman and Herbert had almost identical, really low receiving totals. It was 5 for 26 and 9 for 57. Like everybody's like, oh, Herbert's going to do that. I'm like, really? He had 9 catches for 57 yards last year. Interestingly enough, Roschon had 14 for 128 in backup duty at Texas. So I'm kind of wondering if that becomes his role, because he is also a very good pass protector. He's got good size, good want to. I'm curious to see who gets those more sort of receiving focus down. But in terms of like, it's a long season, running backs wear down, running backs get injured. I kind of honestly don't care, because any of those 3 guys could take starters touches, and I would feel really good about it behind what has been a solid run blocking line and will probably even be better. And that's not really a place. The Bears have been like 2 deep at running back for a while, but the last time they were 3 or 3.5 deep, I can't remember. I love the mix. I love the skill sets. I think it's really, really strong.
Yeah, it's a good place to be. And I just, in my head, I was laughing. I was like, the GPS tracking might say these guys actually had even more yards running in and out of the huddle than they did actually on the field, because they're just going to be in and out every other play. But let's flip over to the defense a little bit. And, I look at that front 4, and that's the spot where I'm like, all right, if the Bears are underwhelming, that's the group. And I wanted your opinion on like, how worried should Bears fans be about the front 4?
Some, but less so than last year for a couple of reasons. There's a lot more help and investment in that rotation than there was last year. Last year it was a seller's market. We were getting rid of guys.
Yeah.
And the additions of guys like Billings and Walker in their roles, so Andrew Billings and DeMarcus Walker, they're sort of low-key free agent ads, but they both were very needed. Billings is the guy that stands in the middle of that defense and says, not through my gap.
Yep.
And Walker's got a little bit more than you think he does. Not super flashy, and he's not the guy you want typically like starting and playing, 700 snaps during the year, but he's one of those under the radar solid quality ads that they didn't pay a lot for. So those are both upgrades from last year, although they may not be the kind of flash that you're looking for. Highly drafted rookies we talked about, they're going to help too. They put, 2 of their top 4 picks right there in the middle, and it's going to be a better rotation. So just an overall better group. And I'd be really surprised if Poles didn't add another pass rusher. We know for a fact that they have been in pretty much every discussion that you've heard about for pass rushers. They poked around on Claypool. There's still Yannick Ngakoue out there in free agency. Like, there's other guys that are being floated that might go in trade.
Clowney hasn't signed anywhere yet.
Yeah, and Clowney to me feels really more like DeMarcus Walker in terms of, here's a guy that can really hammer and compress the pocket. He's not as much of a rusher, but boy, he can mash stuff, and that's pretty helpful, especially if you have guys that can get there and clean it up. So,
and if you resort to like, okay, the 4-man rush isn't working, let's at least run some stunts and create some chaos here. Like that, I think is especially where Walker will help out.
Yeah, let's go NASCAR. Let's see if we can't, put one guy in the middle to collapse it, run a middle stunt over that, and then basically offset with what looks like a 5-man surface so that we get guys to commit, and then somebody stands up and doesn't have anything to do. We get the one-on-one over here for Travis Gibson, for Dominic Robinson. Those guys are going to see less. Like last year, they were the starters and people were keying on them, and that's kind of not a fair gunfight. So this year there's going to be more rotation. I don't think we're done with the group yet. I think the group will look different heading into the season. 1, maybe possibly 2, either free agency, possibly trade additions. And I think they'll be solidly mid-pack, and that will be, again, a massive leap for them from what was a bottom tier. I think it was 28th ranking.
Oh yeah, dude. I was watching the Lions game, and like every third down they're double teaming Justin Jones, and I'm like, that's where we're at. Where the Bears were
that poor
year.
Guy, like he came on as the second option, right? He was the fallback plan to Larry Ogunjobi. So the first move they ever wanted to make in free agency was Ogunjobi. Big dollars right away. We think he's perfect. He ends up, failing his physical, but then going
Right.
to Pittsburgh, playing
Had
really
a
well
good
and
year.
getting re-signed. So they're like, oh, okay, Justin Jones, like good player, feels to me again like a DeMarcus Walker, like good player, but he's the lead, right?
Yeah.
He's what you're double teaming. Like that's the state of your line. It's not there this year. It's elevated. Is it tops? Absolutely not. Do I think they can put together a mid-pack ranking and help support that very good secondary? I think they can do a better job of that this year.
Yeah. I mean, if that D line is middle of the pack, like you're hitting your hopeful expectations, I think, because
Yeah.
it's they got a lot of work to do, and the rookies are going to be really critical for that too. So who are a couple of breakout Bears from you this year, EJ?
DJ Moore and Fields are the obvious choices. Their
Yep.
chemistry looks really good. I'm a huge DJ Moore guy. He is a true number one. Bears have been lacking a true number one for a while. Getsy knows how to use a true number one as an alpha. And I'm excited about that. But on defense, it's another guy you mentioned earlier. Kyler Gordon, I think, really comes into his own. I was not super pleased with the fact that they just gave him the whole plate as a rookie and said,
Yeah.
we're going to play you outside. We're going to play you inside. We're going to play a little star safety. We're going to make you a force player. Like he's physically capable of doing all those things, but that's a huge load as a rookie. And nickel is one of the most mentally challenging roles because you kind of have a four-way go on every play. You have to fit the run if you're going to stop the run from nickel or quarters, which you do. You've got a two-way go. You've got no boundary to work off of. It's a very difficult spot. And they asked him to do that and play outside technique and play trail. Like it was just a lot. And I love him. He's a smart guy, played up here at Washington. He's extremely athletic, very flexible. Love the player. And am really happy that he's going to get to focus a little bit more because now we've got presumably two big guys on the outside that could do their job. He's going to be starting nickel. It's a very important role in the defense. I think he's up to it. And he learned a lot. He came on at the end of last year, even despite that load. Like his last 6 or 7 games, he made plays every game. And if he, again, has a full off season, knows where he's going to be, knows who the guys are that he's playing with, I think he probably takes a jump on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I obviously agree. Excited for him this year. And then we will wrap up just your kind of overall expectations for the year, this year. You could be hot takey, you could play it middle of the road, whatever you want to do. But like, what is your gut on how this plays out for the Bears this year?
Yeah, so we do ceiling and floor at the end of our preview episodes, and in our Bears episode, which dropped today, I put the ceiling at 10, and I think double-digit wins would be impressive for this team. That would have them challenging for the wild card, but I really see the NFC North, and I've got some data to back this up, that it was a better division than people thought last year. Like it was a more powerful division comparatively to other divisions than people thought, and they didn't. They beat each other up a little bit, but not like AFC North style.
Sure.
And I think it's going to take on some of that character where all these teams are improved. Like, I mean, you can talk about the loss of Aaron Rodgers, but in terms of building up the rest of the roster for the Packers, yes, they're going to take a step back. They lost a Hall of Fame quarterback.
It was just everything went wrong season for Green Bay too.
Yeah. Are they going to be bad?
Yeah.
They're not going to be bad. Right.
Yeah.
And there's huge hype around the Lions. I think the Vikings will see whether or not they do the whole fire sale. But as it sits right now, they're also a good team. Are they a great team? No, but you've got 4 teams that are kind of occupying the same space and are just going to smack the hell out of each other. And so if you come out of that, a really tough sort of dogfight division with 10 wins, I think that would be a very successful season. They'll be nibbling at the playoffs. Maybe they make it, maybe they don't. I think the floor is 7, and a lot of people who've watched a lot of Bears football over the last couple of years would say that's incredibly optimistic. I actually don't think it is, because much like the Packers, pretty much everything that you were going to do bad, you did bad last year. You cleared the books of all those dollars. You didn't really buy a wide receiver core. You didn't really have a defensive line. Your offensive line was a mess due to injuries. Like, you did the best you could, but you still ended up with the number 1 overall pick, sort of on purpose.
Yeah.
This is not that, right? Yep. Patron saint of Chicago, Lovie Smith. So I think 10 wins is probably my top. 7 is probably my floor. It's pretty narrow, but a much more talented team than last year. And one that I'm a lot more excited about, sort of just on a last year, if you were going to get excited, it was about development or rookies playing well or individual performances. This year, like, I think they can give some people some games and take a bunch of the games that they were in last year, but ended up losing.
Yeah, I think 10 is like the perfect ceiling because if Fields is good, you're looking at a potential division win. Um, I would say I think the floor is a little lower personally, just because I probably view Fields' floor is lower than you probably do, is probably where that comes in. But yeah, I think there is reason for all of the hope for all of this Bears team, but execution is going to be big. So that is all we got, EJ. Thank you again for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say before we head out?
No, I just want to say thanks. I enjoy your work. I enjoy this series. A lot of people talk about this series in our comments. Even this morning, they were like, between Marcus's stuff and this, my summer's made. I got my podcast content. I'm all good. So I feel like sort of all in the family, and I really appreciate it. And it's always good to come on and talk Bears.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like our summer previews definitely go hand in hand. We kind of cover you guys go go down a couple different roads that I don't explore. I probably do a little bit of the other way, and between the two of us, it is definitely goes in sync. So appreciate you for coming on, EJ. Obviously, everybody go check out the summer previews they got going on, the bootleg show in general. He's got Bears Over Beers starting up in the regular season as well. So yeah, thanks again, EJ. A pleasure as always. And for everybody else, thanks for watching.